Hello everybody, Nick here at Scoggin-Dickey. We appreciate you coming back for another one of our weekly tech videos. Once again, we're out here at my shop. If you don't mind, ignore any background noises. I do have neighbors at this shop, whether it be one guy out here working on a hot rod, another guy over here, which I'm pretty sure is trying to fab up a roll cage, and we have some furry friends above us and over on the corner here that are currently in mating season, so they're laying some eggs and making the mating calls. So if you would, please pay attention to me and not them, and let's cut right to it. Today's video is all about carbureted versus EFI on your LS. We get this question, I bet, twice a day, honestly. And it's all right. There's a lot of questions to be had about this. There is a long list of parts, regardless of which way you go, on how to set up one or the other. There's also, as they say, more than one way to skin a cat. So we're going to cover some of the pros and cons of each setup. We're going to cover the cost differences of each setup. And we have helped customers set up regardless of each way you want to go. So if you want to still call us after this video and figure it out, not a problem. We'll get you all set up. But I personally have done this. I have, of course, done Gen 3 and Gen 4 LS swaps using factory EFI as well as aftermarket EFI. And we're going to be doing a Holley Terminator kit on another project here sometime in the quick future. And I've also done carbureted. I grew up on carburetors. I daily drove carbureted vehicles when I was younger, properly set up. They run great. They don't give really any issues to me. But doing both, I can help educate you guys on what it took to do each one. So let's dive right in here. And the first one I'm going to cover is going to be the carbureted setup here. Let's face it, there's a good chance if you're clicking on this video or watching it, it's because you have a project you're really thinking about going carbureted. Old C10 pickup, a Chevelle, a Nova, some sort of swap in a classic vehicle. You want to stay with more of a classic style induction and fueling, because it's easiest. It's what the project came with. If you were doing it on like my 04 Chevy outside or Dane's Firebird, if you're doing something like that that already came with EFI, it's much easier to set up because the car is made for it. But that's okay. I've done this and I can tell you that this whole setup here, just these three parts that you see, let's take the air cleaner off. This is a spare air cleaner I had lying around. A nice Holley carburetor, a nice Performer RPM intake, and an MSD ignition controller. We're running about $1150. It's about $325 for the intake, another $425 for the controller, and about $400 for the carburetor. If you were saying, but wait a minute, I can grab a good deal on a used carb, just like you can grab a good used intake manifold. For this discussion's sake, we are not talking about any wheeling and dealing used parts. I know we all do it. I do it too. Right behind Dane right now is an old used Edelbrock that we were going to post up and show here, but we need to keep this, if you were to buy it, brand new. And if your engine came as a long block, because we know how it is, you went to the junkyard, you grabbed a 5.3, a 6 liter, what have you, and it came with this truck intake. Well, yeah, if you have this intake, there's a good chance EFI is going to come out a little bit cheaper, because man, all this stuff in good shape is worth a pretty penny. If you were to try to call me up and buy it brand new, it'd be a lot of money. So new parts only for the discussion, but that's how much you're looking at. About $1150 for something like this. It's not that bad. It's all brand new stuff, and let's face it, this is some top quality stuff. Nice Holley double pumper. This MSD controller is going to be one of the higher quality bits. It comes with programmable little pills, just like the old rev limiter for the old 6AL box, but they have timing curves in them, which is great. Or you can hook up a laptop and do a custom timing curve, which is super trick, and that's all included here. It's not anything extra you have to buy. It's included here, and that's a big deal. If you're wondering about the distributor setup, I'm not going to be discussing that for a really good reason. I'm going to go ahead and just quell any questions about that. The distributor setup is far more expensive on an LS. It comes with a custom timing cover. It does have the provision for a mechanical fuel pump, but that's not really the benefit. You have to use a MSD distributor, surprisingly, for a small block Ford. You have to have a custom water pump setup. It starts racking up some big bucks. It is not worth it. We have had some customers that have tried to do it just for a street car. It's not the way to go. If you're wondering, then why the heck do they even make the thing? There are racing classes where you can use an LS engine. You can't use the distributed ignition system these come with, or of course the EFI. So that's what it was really developed for, were class racing that required those rules. Believe me, If those guys could, they would be buying these by the dozen and putting them on everything they had. If they changed the rules and let them do it, they'd get rid of that distributor. So we're not going to be talking about the distributor setup. There is no benefit to any type of project or street vehicle here in terms of performance especially, but cost benefit, it's hundreds of dollars more than this setup here. So let's ignore that for this discussion and talk about this. These are very easy to set up. It is an MSD ignition box. So if you did an old 6A or 6AL on your small block Chevy, small block Ford, what have you, it really is the same. And you can run just those little pills for your timing curve. They come with several and they talk about what kind of timing curve they have. So very easy for you to put in and set up. So do not be worried about this. This is actually pretty easy to wire up and set up. And you get the great benefit of the coil on plug style ignition that these have, or should I say coil near plug. We all know they have a tiny little spark plug wire. That being said, when you properly set up a carburetor, they do run great. They have good drivability. Most of them come with electric choke these days. This one, I think, is vacuum secondary, I believe. Yes, right there. So you can get great drivability out of these. I had an old Ford Ranger with a V8 swap that I daily drove with a carburetor. I had my old Orange Nova that I had that had the same kind of carburetor on it. And once they're set up and good to go, man, they get decent gas mileage, they perform really well, they have good drivability and startup even in cold weather. We do get some cold weathers out here in West Texas. It's kind of strange weather out here. So it can be done. But what about the EFI stuff? I know I just talked about this and built it up, but what about this? This will run usually more than a carbureted setup on initial purchases. You start buying a new nice intake manifold and the fuel rails, the injectors, the throttle body, the sensors, then you got to find a way to wire it. Do you go to PSI or Spear Tech or Nelson Performance for a harness and use a stock computer? Do you go to Holley and get a Terminator X? Great setups, self-learning EFI so you don't have to tune it, and believe me, I'm really not blowing smoke here. If you think this MSD ignition box is easy to wire up, the new self-learning EFI systems are so well wired, so self-contained, they need about 5 to 7 wires hooked up depending on how you're setting it up, and they are good to go. And the amount of help these days online and with Holley's tech videos, they do the same thing we do on their website, it's getting easier and easier and easier for anybody to hook up EFI these days. So don't be too worried about the wiring. It's not that big a deal much anymore. Here's the other aspect of it. The fueling. Everybody worries about fueling one of these things, but that's getting easier today too. If you have a classic vehicle like my Vet here, or maybe a Chevelle or a Nova, a Camaro, Mustang, Dodge Challenger, it doesn't matter. They are coming out with more and more solutions, high quality products for cheap. Aeromotive does fuel tanks as well as Holley. Holley has some great lines of their Holley sniper-based EFI fuel tanks that look bone stock, but they actually have the baffling built in like they should, the high volume fuel pumps. They can do returnless or return on those, and it's making EFI easier and easier and easier. So now that you've heard both, what do you choose? Well, I can tell you that EFI is better. There is a reason we went from carburetors to EFI. At first, of course, it was emissions, but as the years gone on, EFI has become such a powerhouse in terms of fuel and ignition control. The EFI built-in controls ignition, so you don't have to buy this box either. That you can do a lot of stuff, especially if you're looking to do modifications. Nitrous, maybe a turbo or two. I hope so. If you're watching this and you're thinking about a turbo, go for it. That's where EFI becomes a big leg up. So the initial cost might be higher, but there's a lot of benefits there. I know it's more tedious to set up. I'm not gonna say more difficult. I've done it myself. It's not difficult, it just took me an extra day. It's kind of a pain. I'll go ahead and be honest with you. Wiring is not my friend. I do not like wiring, just like the rest of you. I have nightmares about a spaghetti of colored wires that you can't seem to solve, but it's not like that anymore. It is way easier. We would like to thank a particular viewer who messaged us on YouTube and said that if we did this video, what they wanted to know was the height difference, which is actually a pretty good question. I mean, I got an old Vet here to the side. The hood height on a lot of these can be a problem if you're doing like an LS swap or maybe even a big block. You got to run some real snug like air cleaner and intake manifold setups to tuck everything down below the stock hood. Well, it's the same for you guys. If you've got a Camaro and you want to keep that stock hood or the SS hood, no cowl hoods, same thing with a Chevelle or a Nova, Mustang, Charger, Challenger, it doesn't matter these days. As long as it's pretty much not a truck, you do have to worry about hood clearance. So we'd like to appreciate that, viewer, because the second half of this video, that's what we're going to discuss here. How high does this end up being once you put it on? Now, we took some measurements right before the video here. Dane sent me some help and wrote it down on a scratch piece of cardboard. We used some measurements that we measured on the stock intakes here. This is an LS6. They're the same height as like what you'd find like LS1, LS2, LS6. If you happen to find one of these car intakes or the Dorman replacement intakes, they're all within a 1/4 inch of each other. So these are pretty low profile anyway. You don't have to worry about these, but we're going to give you the specs here in a minute just to be sure. The truck intakes, this is probably what came on your junkyard engine. You're wanting to run this. You're wanting to make sure when you slam the hood, you don't boink, pop a big dent in the middle of it. I will tell you, this is the old intake. Yes, this is the intake from the 5.3 cam down video. It was my personal intake off of the white truck. But this intake is only 1/2 inch taller than the new body style intake. And you did hear me right. It is just 1/2 inch taller. And it's only because of these darn little studs where you mount a cover on these. The beauty cover that the stock trucks came with. So that's the only difference here. And then, of course, what's the difference here? Here's the other thing. I have a small block over there with a Performer intake. Probably the most common setup any of y'all are going to have on any vehicle. We did some measurements and used some of the information we got from GM at work to measure the difference between the center of the crankshaft to the bottom of the valley. Not the valley cover, the valley. We did that on both the small block and the LS. The reason being, all these intake heights are measured, whether you're doing a Holley intake or an Edelbrock intake here, or what I measured here today. That's the base that they use it off of. So that's the information we're going to give you to help you figure out, so you can take the measurements and see if something's going to fit. Now, from the bottom of this valley on the block, kind of what they used to call like the China wall back in the day, the LS6 intake is 6.4 inches tall, and that is at the highest peak. It's right here down the middle. The truck intake is 10.5. But if you have a Trailblazer SS intake, it doesn't have as much stuff here on the top. It's about 1/2 inch shorter at 10 inches. This setup here, and we did this measurement based on Edelbrock's information as well as the carburetor as well as the air cleaner. This is your typical like 1-inch drop base air cleaner. The most common 14-inch air cleaner you're going to get with a 3-inch element filter here. It is going to be about 90% of y'all, I bet, have something like this. And this one measured out here, let's look at this, was 10.5, just like the truck intake. I know it might look a little bit different. It's because it's taller down here at the bottom. Don't worry about that. We did that measurement again based off the valley. But here's something that you need to know. Going from the center line of the crank to the valley wall, or sometimes the China wall as y'all called it, between a small block and an LS is 3/8 of an inch difference. So this is taller by that much. A small block with that Performer intake manifold, not Performer RPM, the Performer, came out to 9.5 inches. So this is 10.5, that was 9.5, but it's another 3/8 of an inch taller. So it's not an inch difference, it's 1 3/8 inches. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. We actually thought it was a pretty good idea. I'm not going to say his name, but a big thank you again, sir, for making that comment. We do go through our comments as often as we can. We are so busy, but we do go through them from time to time. We do read them. We want to respond to them, and we do get some ideas. And honestly, in the last go around of going through comments, that guy was the only one that came up with a really great video idea. We appreciate you, sir, and we really hope we helped you and others out to use this information. We're going to list this information in the comments, or the description below, so you'll get it going. And once again, we really appreciate you stopping by for another one of our weekly tech videos where we try to help out hot rodders like you and me. We will see you next week for another video. Thanks for stopping by.